My name is Tom Nash, and I quit my corporate job as a senior financial analyst to break down companies for you. If there's one thing you need to know about me, I don't take bullshit from anybody. Let me tell you a thing about hyperinflation. Most of you have no idea what it actually looks like and feels like. However, since I was born in 1981, I know exactly how it looks like, exactly how it feels like, and trust me, that ain't a pleasant sight. Russia in the 90s, specifically 91, 92, was a horrible place to live in because prices went up by 2,500% almost overnight. You woke up, you couldn't afford a loaf of bread.
Svetlana Loganov and her two kids will slide right past the black market. She's not interested in cigarettes or shoes today, but rather in getting enough food for dinner. It is the toughest job in Moscow these days. Before price controls were lifted in January, she and her husband Vadim were making it. But prices this trip to the market have doubled in some cases. By the time she comes back at the end of the week, they could quadruple.
You had people hoarding bread and food, pretty much cash becoming useless. People trying to spend as much of it as they can just to get food. You see the massive lines, the shortages.
The problem for shoppers here these days isn't the long lines. Russians are used to waiting in line. Their concern is what happens when they reach the end of that line. There, they'll find either bread or milk 3 or 4 times higher than they were just weeks ago, or worse, no food at all.
People just going berserk because the money was losing its value so fast that by the end of the day, your retirement fund was probably worthless. That was as bad as the shit was. And trust me, I was 11 years old. I remember it very vividly. Here's the question for you. You hear all these fudsters talking about, well, we're headed to hyperinflation. Now, you can't mistake me for a guy who loves what the Fed is doing. You can't mistake me for a Jerome Powell fan. I've been on record saying that we're heading into inflationary times. It's just inevitable. When you're printing so much money, when you have the interest rates so low, it's inevitable that you're heading to inflation, especially when it's compounded by the shortages because of the logistical supply chain issues. When you have more demand for goods than you have goods in the market, when you have much more money than actual physical goods or services, that's where you see inflation. Now, here's the thing. In the US, there's definitely inflationary concerns, and they're rightfully actually voiced. Just recently, we had 4.5% in April, which is pretty much almost double, I think even more than double than the standard 2%, right? So I'm not here to say that inflation isn't coming, but in this video, I want to explain to you why I think the whole fear about hyperinflation is nothing but FUD. It's mumbo jumbo, it's nonsense, and it's being voiced by people who have no freaking idea about economics. It's just pitiful to hear these idiots talk. Let me explain this in a 3-minute video. Don't click nothing, don't smash nothing, don't buy nothing. I mean, you can buy a t-shirt pretty much. That's the only thing I sell. And even then, like, who cares? I just want your attention because I want to educate you about hyperinflation. And I want to avoid all these fudsters from actually getting some space in your head. Check this out. So I just gave away my bottom line here, which is we're not headed to hyperinflation. But I do want to explain why, because I think most of my viewers actually want to hear the full analysis. So here's the thing. What is hyperinflation? So hyperinflation is when shit hits the fan. Essentially, if you're talking about normal inflation numbers, is about 2% per year. High inflation numbers is about 4% per year. The highest we've ever seen in the US was in the 80s, 15% per year. Even that is nowhere near hyperinflation. And just to give you a general idea, in economics, usually the threshold for entering the hyperinflation discussion is about 50%. Which is something unprecedented that we've never seen before. You have to understand that hyperinflation is an insane race to the bottom or the top, wherever you're looking at it. Excessive price raises overnight. Essentially, you waking up realizing, well, my 401k is worthless. Hallelujah. That's reality for a lot of Russians that grew up in the 90s. That's not a fable. However, I'm going to explain to you why this is completely impossible in the US economic and monetary system. And even though I'm not a huge fan of Jerome Powell or the Fed, I'm going to explain why I think what they're doing right now is actually the right thing to do. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're definitely headed into inflationary times. Now, you have Jerome Powell actually denying even that, which is something I don't agree with. However, the rest of his policy actually makes sense. And as you know, in my videos, I like to give you the nuanced, unbiased truth without any agenda. I don't want to promote any agenda, left or right, or politics or nothing. Just the truth, the nuanced one. So I think the risk with the US monetary system is not of hyperinflation, which is literally impossible. I'm going to explain in a second why. is actually the adverse effect. So let me explain how it works. When you have increased inflation, the Fed raises the interest rates. Why? Because they want to encourage savings. If you encourage savings by increasing the interest rate, you're basically telling people, hey, if you put your money in the bank, you're going to get a very nice interest. So you might want to do that instead of buying that new Porsche. What that causes is less competition for the same amount of commodities, actually slowing down the inflation. But it's a really nasty pill. It's kind of a poison pill to the market because what it does, it cools down the market. It's like antibiotics. You can't just take it and say, well, I'm just going to kill the bad cells. It kills everything. So it slows down the entire economy. And a good example for how dangerous applying this interest increase policy is, let's think about a car. Let's say you're going 85, 90 on the freeway. You're flying. All of a sudden, you pump the brakes all the way through. You're going to crash. And obviously, I'm not saying that the Fed will do it, but I'm here to say that the only real risk to the US economy is that the Fed is going to overreact and actually pull the trigger much faster than it needs to actually increase the interest rate and will actually push the market into a recession. So based on the monetary policy of the US and Jerome Powell and the Fed, you can clearly see that they have their finger on the trigger. They're ready to pull that lever at any given moment to increase the interest rates to slow down inflation. Them letting inflation going over 5 or 6% is almost zero. I don't think they'll ever do it. Now, here's the thing. The real risk here is that they pull that lever way faster and stronger than it needs to be pulled. Going back to my example of the pumping the brakes all the way through. That might push the market, the stock market, and the general market into recession, not depression. Don't listen to the hype artist from the other side as well. Recession. Now, that can happen if you cool down the market too fast, too much, too early, which is the real risk. So before you go and you listen to all these videos about hyperinflation from people who have no idea what hyperinflation is, trust me, that's not the real risk. The real risk is that Jerome Powell needs to understand that they shouldn't increase interest rates until they're confident that the market is actually speeding way too fast for its own good. Right now, that's definitely not the case. And the good news is that Jerome Powell is aware of that. You can hear Jerome Powell going on TV and saying, hey, we're nowhere close to pulling that lever because we're not there yet. I absolutely love that statement, even though I don't agree with him that the future is inflation. He says that there's not going to be inflation. I think there will be inflation, but there is no way in hell. In fact, my grandpa has more odds of getting a job at the Russian Tesla factory that still does not exist than of hyperinflation in the US. And that's it. I'm not going to waste any more of your time because I respect every single minute of it. Thank you so much for the channel members. Thank you for the patrons. I hope that completely diffuses the FUD about hyperinflation. It's nonsense. It's a meme. It's bullshit. For everybody who keeps saying that, you better sit your ass back down and listen to what I just said. Shout out to everybody. See you guys later.